No decade stands out more than the 1960s. Nothing else looked like this. The shapes, the furniture, ranch homes, maybe split level. Even 2 floors seemed lower to the ground. And the 1960s home had a smell. Carpet and cooking and something metallic from the furnace. Wood paneling, formica on chrome legs, a formal living room we used twice a year, and a den nobody left. That house, that specific, unmistakable thing, is gone. Not renovated, not updated. It just left, and nobody announced it. You'll recognize some of these 50 things that were standard in virtually every American home built in the 1960s. A few you had genuinely forgotten existed. 1 or 2 might change how you read your own floor plan. Come through the front door. Wipe your feet. The living room is straight ahead, and there's a good chance nobody's in it. In summer, the couch had plastic covers, clear vinyl, fitted over the cushions, tucked tight at the corners. Hot. They stuck to the backs of your legs. They made a sound when you shifted your weight, a soft, adhesive squeak that you would recognize anywhere, still, 50 years later. They were protecting furniture nobody was allowed to sit on in the first place. The logic was airtight at the time. The formal living room went quiet sometime in the 1980s, not because anyone decided to stop using it, because the television moved in and the room was never formal again. The formal living room was not for living, it was for company. The carpet had vacuum lines still in it from 3 days ago. Nothing was out of place because nothing was ever picked up, because nothing was ever moved. Company came through, stayed an hour, and then the room went back to waiting. 3 channels. You got up to change them. You walked to the set, turned the dial, a satisfying mechanical click per position, and came back. The dial went from 2 to 13 with gaps where no channel broadcast, and you knew which numbers worked and which were just static. 1 kid in every family got permanently assigned the job. Not because anyone said so. It was just understood who the dial turner was. That kid stood up 10,000 times and never once thought it was strange. The hi-fi console sat against the wall in a long cabinet of polished walnut. A hinged lid that opened to the turntable. Speakers behind fabric grills on both ends. A row of knobs. Volume, bass, treble, balance. Set once, the day the thing came home, and never adjusted again. The 1963 Zenith console weighed close to 90 pounds. You built the room around it. It was furniture as much as it was a record player. It is gone. And so is the idea that music is worth building a room around. The antenna was 2 metal rods on top of the set. You tilted them. You spread them. You angled one in and one out, while someone in another room called out whether the picture got better or worse. If you walked away and the picture went bad again, it meant you were part of the antenna circuit. Your body was the signal. You stood there, one arm extended, for minutes at a time. The aluminum foil on the tips was everyone's second move. Sometimes it helped. Nobody could say why it helped. The sewing basket was in the corner of the living room. Wicker with a hinged lid, full of thread in 12 colors, a tomato pin cushion stuck with needles, and a pair of heavy shears that were not for paper. There was no sewing room. The basket just lived there, the way the ashtray lived there, the way the TV guide lived there, not stored, simply present. Your mother reached into it without looking and found what she needed every time. The Sears Wishbook was not a catalog. It was an event. It arrived in the mail sometime in October, thick, heavy, the size of a small city's phone directory. The toy section started somewhere around page 400. Kids dog-eared those pages for weeks. You built a list, you revised the list, you carried the catalog to your mother and pointed at things and explained carefully why each one was important. She listened. She said she'd see. That meant something, and you knew it. The catalog stopped arriving in 1993. Nobody scheduled that either. The TV guide lived on the coffee table, small, magazine-sized, with a full week's listings by channel and hour. All 3 channels, all 7 days, every evening, laid out in a grid you had memorized by Wednesday. You circled things. You planned. If the network moved your show without warning, you might not find out until you had already missed it. Down the hall to the kitchen. You could hear it before you got there. The percolator, something in a pan. This was the room where the house was actually alive. The kitchen table was formica on chrome legs, yellow or mint green or a speckled white and black that looked like a countertop. The surface wiped clean with a damp cloth and never quite got all the way clean. Formica was first used commercially in 1938. The chrome-leg kitchen table became standard in post-war production housing by 1949. The one under the window had a wobble on one side, and someone had put a folded matchbook under the foot sometime in 1962, and it was still there. 6 chairs, even when there were only 4 of you. Once a month, your father sat at the kitchen table with the bills and a rubber band and a fountain pen. He had a ledger, a narrow book with columns, where he wrote every number by hand. The envelopes were in a stack. He opened each one, wrote the check, recorded the amount, licked the flap. Nobody left him alone when he did this. The table became a financial nerve center, quiet, serious. The whole month's reckoning played out on Formica. The checkbook balanced when it balanced. Sometimes it took him 2 passes. You knew by the second pass to stay out of the kitchen. That table held every financial decision the family made. Now those decisions happen on a phone in 3 seconds, anywhere, alone. The coupon folder was organized by grocery aisle, an accordion file, maybe 6 inches wide with labeled tabs, dairy, canned goods, bread, meat, and newspaper clippings tucked into each one. Your mother clipped them Sunday morning with the kitchen scissors. She arrived at the store with the folder open to the right section before she reached the shelf. She knew exactly what she was paying before she got to the register. The savings were real. The organization was not optional. Coffee came from a percolator. It took time. It made noise, a low rhythmic burbling that started slow and built until the glass bubble on top turned dark. The smell hit the kitchen about 3 minutes before the coffee was ready and filled the house before you were fully awake. 1 pot. 1 strength? No choices. The pot stayed warm on the burner all morning, and the last cup was bitter and thick, and somebody always drank it anyway. The milk bottles stood in the refrigerator door, heavy glass, cold to the touch, with a thin cardboard cap pressed into the lip. Cream settled at the top, a visible band, yellower than the milk below, maybe an inch deep. Your father poured it off for his coffee before anyone else was up. You shook the bottle to mix it, or you didn't, and the first glass was half cream. A daily ritual that had defined American mornings for nearly a century, replaced by a wax carton and a trip to aisle 7. The butter dish had a glass lid, clear glass, domed slightly, with a small knob on top. The butter sat at room temperature on the counter or the table, soft enough to spread without tearing the bread. The dish picked up the smells of the kitchen, toast, bacon, coffee, and held them in the glass. When you lifted the lid, the whole morning was in there. There was a chalkboard on the kitchen wall, small, framed, usually near the telephone, grocery lists, appointments. Defrost the meat, a phone number someone wrote in chalk in 1961 and never transferred anywhere. The eraser was a little rectangular felt pad that left chalk dust on your hand. You wiped your hand on your jeans. The chalk dust moved to your jeans. The chalkboard was replaced by a magnetic notepad on the refrigerator, then by a shared app that nobody updates in time. There was a can of bacon grease on the stove, an old coffee can, dented, a little darkened around the outside. You poured the grease in after every batch of bacon and let it solidify, and then you used it to fry the next thing. Eggs, cornbread, green beans that needed to taste like something. The can had a history. Some of what was in there was months old. Nobody bothered. The can was never empty. It was never new. It was just always there, between the burners, part of the equipment. The ice cube trays were metal with a lever, cold aluminum, a little damp from the freezer. You gripped it with both hands, twisted, and for a second nothing moved, and then everything moved at once. Half the cubes scattered across the counter, 2 hit the floor. You put them in the glass anyway. They were yours. Plastic trays came in the mid-1960s and solved the problem cleanly. 6 o'clock. Everybody home. Dinner on the table. This wasn't the exception. It was the schedule every night. Same time. Same table. Your father was home by 5:30. Whatever was happening, a game, a show, an argument about something that happened at school, it stopped. You sat down. You ate. Nobody called it a ritual. Nobody had to. The chairs already knew where everyone sat. The television was off. The telephone could wait. For 45 minutes the family was in one room and nobody was going anywhere, and that was just the shape of a weeknight. The shape of a weeknight. That phrase sounds like it should mean something obvious. It doesn't anymore. Tuesday night might be Johnny Marzetti. Egg noodles, ground beef browned with onion, a can of cream of mushroom soup, cheddar on top, or Velveeta, if your family was a Velveeta family, and both sides felt strongly about it. Baked at 350 until the edges bubbled and browned. Every family had a version. Every family called it something different. It came out of the oven and went straight to the table, and you served yourself from the dish with the big spoon, the one with the wooden handle that got darker every year. The recipe existed nowhere outside of your mother's head. When she was gone, it went with her. Somebody said grace before the meal. Short, the same words every night, or nearly. Heads bowed, a beat of quiet. Then the food moved around the table, passed right to left or left to right, or in whatever direction your family had always done it, which was the only direction that made sense. The ritual took 15 seconds. The 15 seconds made the meal different from just eating. One bathroom, one for the whole house. The tile was pink, or mint green, or baby blue. Wall to ceiling in 4-inch squares with a thin grout line between them. The same color on the floor in smaller pieces, a contrasting trim at the border. It had been chosen from a catalog sometime in the mid-1950s, and it was going to be there forever, because you didn't retile a bathroom, you just kept cleaning it. Porcelain holds a color for 100 years. Those bathrooms are still pink somewhere, under 3 layers of someone else's renovation. If the house was built after 1965, the fixtures were avocado green, not just paint, the toilet, the sink, the tub. A matched set, in the color that a manufacturer decided was 1967. Harvest Gold in some houses, Aqua in others. The whole coordinated suite cost more than the standard white and announced that someone was paying attention to what was current. It still looks exactly like 1967. It always will. The medicine cabinet was recessed into the wall above the sink. A hinged mirror, a chrome handle, 2 or 3 shelves inside. Mercurochrome in its orange bottle. Brill cream in its green and white tube. Baby aspirin in the orange bottle. It held everything the bathroom needed, and it was never organized in a way that made sense. You opened it for one thing, and something else slid forward. You caught it before it fell, or you didn't. There was a slot in the wall behind the mirror, just inside the cabinet, cut into the metal frame, maybe labeled razor blade disposal in small stamped letters, maybe just left as a thin slot you were meant to understand. You dropped your used safety razor blade through it, and it disappeared into the wall. The blade fell into the space between the drywall and the exterior sheathing, the hollow gap inside the wall itself. Nobody asked where they went. Nobody told you. You dropped the blade through the slot and closed the cabinet, and that was the end of it. They stacked up in there over the years, hundreds of them in some houses, rusting slowly in the dark behind the plaster. Old houses built before 1980 with a medicine cabinet are still full of them, not mentioned, not removed, just there in the dark, still in the wall. Nobody thought to explain it because nobody thought there was anything to explain. Your mother went to bed with her hair set, pink sponge rollers the size of a quarter, clipped with a bobby pin. She could do it in near dark from muscle memory, rolling a section, tucking the end, clipping it closed, moving to the next one. The bobby pins were in a small glass dish on the vanity. By morning, some of them were on the pillow. By morning, the hair held its shape exactly as intended. The rollers worked. That was the whole point. They worked, and so you used them every night without it feeling like sacrifice. Down the hall, the kids' room, or the room you shared, or the one that was yours alone. The bedspread was chenille, white or pale yellow, with a texture of soft raised loops. Heavy when you pulled it up, warm without being hot. The pattern of tufted bumps was something your fingers traced without thinking, lying in the dark before sleep. Your mother made the bed with it pulled tight and tucked under a perfect fold at the top. By morning, it was at the foot of the bed where you'd pushed it off in the night. She made it again, every morning, without commentary. The transistor radio was under the pillow after 9 o'clock, small enough to fit in a shirt pocket, powered by a 9-volt battery. The dial lit up pale green in the dark. You turned the volume down to just above silence. The AM station coming through the tiny speaker pressed near your ear, staticky at the edges, half music and half static. Your parents thought you were asleep. You were half asleep, which felt like the same thing at the time, which was, maybe, the best state you could be in for the music that was playing. In June, there was a jar of Fireflies on the nightstand, a mason jar with holes punched in the lid, nail and hammer, done in the backyard before dark. You'd spent 20 minutes chasing them across the grass with your cupped hands, catching them more by feel than sight, dropping them through the lid and screwing it back on fast. In the dark room, the jar glowed. Not constantly. They had their own rhythm, their own interval, on and then off, and then a different one from somewhere else in the jar, and then off again. Sometimes they synchronized, and the whole jar lit at once. You watched it until you couldn't stay awake. In the morning, the jar was still on the nightstand, and you took it outside and unscrewed the lid and they flew off, or they didn't, and either way you did the same thing tomorrow night. Those were the last summer nights before you stopped doing things like that. You didn't know which one was last. You never do. Step outside for a moment. The house had a face it showed the neighborhood, and the neighborhood had one it showed back. The picture window faced the street. A single pane, floor to nearly ceiling, right in the center of the front wall. From inside, you watched the neighborhood go by. From outside, the neighborhood watched your living room in return. The drapes were always halfway drawn, not closed, not open, the house facing both directions at once. The picture window was an architectural statement. We are here, and we know you can see us, and that is fine. That was the social contract of the block. It dissolved without anyone signing anything. The screen door had a creak at the top and a spring that pulled it shut whether you were ready or not. Wood frame, wire mesh, and a hinged return that worked on inertia. It slammed. It always slammed. Your mother told you 100 times not to let it slam, and you let it slam every single time because the spring did not care about your intentions. The mesh stretched loose in the lower corner from someone pressing it open with 1 foot too many times. You could tell which corner by which house you were in. That sound, the creak and the slam, is still enough to send you somewhere specific. The specific place is gone. The sound carries you there anyway. The milk box sat on the front step. A small insulated metal box, just big enough for 3 or 4 glass bottles. The milkman came before dawn. You could hear the clink of bottles from the bedroom window if you were up early enough. The box had a lid. The lid had a handle. Every morning someone had to go out and bring the milk in before it warmed, and that was the first errand of the day, in bare feet on cold concrete. A daily ritual that had defined American mornings for nearly a century, replaced by a wax carton and a trip to aisle 7. Around the back. The yard was not just grass, it was a whole separate part of the day. The swing set was in the yard. Metal tubing, painted once when it arrived, fading and rusting at the joints by August. The whole frame walked a few inches across the yard every week until your father re-anchored it. The seat was a rubber strap on chain links, and the chains pinched if you got your fingers in the wrong place. By late summer, the rust left orange streaks on your hands. You kept swinging. The rust was part of it. The incinerator sat at the back corner of the yard. A small brick chimney, or a metal barrel with holes drilled in the sides, or a cement block structure your father had built one Saturday. Every evening you burned what couldn't be recycled and couldn't go in the can. Paper, cardboard, the light trash. The smoke went up in a thin column, and the neighbors' incinerators were going too, and the whole block smelled like something being finished. Most municipalities banned residential burning by the early 1970s. Until then, burning the trash at dusk was just part of the evening schedule. It stopped, and nobody mourned it specifically, and the evening smells changed. The leaves came down in October. Your father raked them into a pile, long-handled metal rake, the kind with flat tines that made a particular sound against dry leaves that exists only in October. The pile went up in the corner of the yard, taller than it looked, built over an afternoon. You ran at it from 20 feet back, launched yourself, disappeared into it, and the leaves went everywhere, and you got up and did it again until the pile was too scattered to hold you. Then you raked it up. You were the one who scattered it. By evening, The pile was burning in the incinerator, sending smoke into the dark sky, and the yard was clear, and the night smelled like autumn, in a way that autumn no longer quite smells. The stairs to the basement, the light switch at the top. You pulled the string on the bare bulb at the bottom if the first light didn't reach far enough. The basement had become a room, a 1950s and 1960s idea. The rumpus room, knotty pine paneling on the walls, linoleum tile on the floor, a bar in one corner, even if nobody drank much, because a rumpus room was supposed to have a bar, a card table, a smaller television down here, and this was the one where the kids watched on Saturday morning. The ceiling was lower, the light was different. The basement had its own rules, and kids understood that a different room meant different rules, and used that understanding accordingly. In the corner of the basement, with no walls around it, there was a toilet. Not enclosed, not screened, just a toilet, freestanding, connected to the drain line, sitting in the open basement floor the way a furnace sits in a basement. No door, no curtain. You walked down the stairs, and there it was. If you grew up in western Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh and the mill towns around it, you know exactly what this is. The Pittsburgh Potty. The mill workers who came home from a shift didn't want to track coal dust and iron grime through the house and up to the good bathroom. The basement toilet was practical, efficient, working-class logic expressed in plumbing. By the 1960s, the mills were changing. New houses didn't include them. The ones that remained were already a holdover, a feature from an earlier set of conditions that was quietly becoming a curiosity. Nobody explained it to guests. Nobody thought to. It was just there. If your grandparents' house had one, you knew its exact location, and you'd probably used it once, and you never asked why it existed, and your grandmother never said. Somewhere in the basement, there were supplies. A stack of civil defense pamphlets, government-issued yellow covers, explaining what to do if the sirens went off. A few metal cans of water. A flat tin of survival crackers, dense and square, tasting of nothing in particular. Maybe a transistor radio in a case, a flashlight, and extra batteries in a box that also held some candles. Nobody talked about it at dinner. It was just there, the way a fire extinguisher is just there, the presence of it acknowledging a thing nobody said aloud. The fear it represented was enormous. The supplies were modest. That gap between what they were prepared for and what the crackers in a tin could actually do was something that never got resolved, and most families just let it sit there in the basement, unresolved, next to the Wringer Washer. The laundry chute was a door in the hallway wall, small, maybe 18 inches square, with a wooden handle or a metal latch. You opened it and dropped dirty clothes straight down into the basement. They fell and landed in a pile at the bottom. As a child, you thought about whether you could fit through it. You never tried. Back upstairs. The house had its own rhythm of work, and most of it came through the laundry. The clothesline stretched from the house to a post in the backyard. 3 lines held up by a T-shaped wooden post that leaned slightly to the right and had been leaning slightly to the right for 15 years and wasn't going anywhere. Sheets on Monday, towels and clothes through the week. The clothes came in before dinner, stiff from the wind, cold at the edges, smelling like outside in a way you cannot describe accurately to someone who grew up with a dryer. The smell is gone now. You know what you mean when you say it. The Wringer Washer was still in the corner. By the early 1960s, most families had the automatic, but the Wringer was still there, still connected, still used for heavy loads. 2 rollers at the top, close together, that you fed wet laundry through slowly, the water squeezing out before the clothes went to the line. The machine weighed close to 200 pounds. It gurgled and churned and squeezed every towel like it held a personal grievance. You kept your fingers back from the rollers because your mother had explained once why. Through the side door, into the garage. The garage was for the car, not for storage, not for overflow, for the car. Every evening the car came home and went in. The car had its own shelter, the same as the family did, and the garage was for the car the way the kitchen was for cooking. This arrangement ended sometime in the 1980s, quietly. The car moved to the driveway. The garage filled with things that had nowhere else to go. The car has been outside ever since. The workbench was along the garage wall, a craftsman bench from Sears or a homemade one of plywood. The tools were craftsman, red metal toolbox with 2 drawers and a tray on top, each tool in its slot, each socket in its place. A ratchet wrench, 3 screwdrivers, a ball-peen hammer, a crescent wrench adjusted to the nut size most used and left there. Your father knew which wrench he needed by the feel of the handle before he looked at it. You never quite got to that. Most people probably haven't. Sometime during the afternoon, the doorbell rang. It might be nothing, or it might be one of the people who came to the door in that era. A whole category of visitor that simply does not exist anymore. The encyclopedia salesman came on a weekday in the afternoon. He rang the front bell, which meant he was not someone who knew you. He had a suit jacket and a briefcase, and he asked for just a few minutes. He came inside. He sat at the kitchen table because your mother was polite and offered him a seat. He opened the briefcase and laid out a single volume, the Britannica or World Book or Compton's, and the color plates inside, and a payment plan on a card, so many dollars a month, for so many months. Your father came home and sat down and pretended to think it over. Sometimes the books arrived 6 weeks later in cardboard boxes and went on the living room shelf, where they stayed for 30 years. Sometimes your father walked him to the door and shook his hand and said he needed to talk it over with his wife. That was the polite way of saying no. The salesman understood it, picked up his case, and went to the next house on the block. Either way, a man at the kitchen table with 1 volume of the 1963 Britannica and a payment plan. That was a Tuesday afternoon. The set was already a few years out of date the day it arrived. It didn't matter. It was still the library. The Avon Lady knew your mother's name. She came with a hard-sided case and the current catalog, and they had coffee and looked through it together at the kitchen table. This was not a transaction. It was a visit. The Avon Lady lived 2 streets over. She had kids in the same school. She came every few weeks, stayed 20 minutes, and left with an order form. Your mother wore the same lipstick for a decade. She ordered it from the same person for a decade. The reliability went both ways. The phone company called it an upgrade when they moved ordering to the catalog. What they meant was, your neighbor is no longer part of your shopping by default. The stamps went in a book. S&H Green Stamps, 1 or 2 per dollar at the grocery store, licked and pressed into the pages of a small booklet. The books went in the kitchen drawer until there were enough, and then you took a stack of them to the redemption center and traded them for a toaster or a lamp or a set of Pyrex mixing bowls. The backs of the stamps were gummy and slightly sweet or slightly chemical. depending on the batch. Someone always said they were going to get to the books this week. Eventually, they did. The good stuff took 2 or 3 years of grocery stamps to earn. The house didn't end at the walls. It extended outward, into the block, into routines that connected your house to every house. Everything in this house was designed around proximity and shared time. The question isn't where all these things went. The question is what we put in their place. If something in this video hit you somewhere you weren't expecting, leave it in the comments. Tell us which room it was. Tell us which item. The razor blade slot, the Pittsburgh Potty, the Avon Lady at the table, the Fireflies in the jar. If you're new here, this is Back Then with Frank. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if someone in your life would remember all of this, share it with them. They've been waiting to talk about it.